Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of my Devlog series for Ardor 2. Today I'd like to briefly explain my approach to creating a turn-based tactics system, both how it works and why I'm doing it this way. I've made this exact kind of game before, with Ardor 1. That game was a good first effort, but hit the ceiling of what I could do with it. I learned a lot making it, including how not to program turn-based combat. In Ardor 1, I started with a straightforward approach. Every hex has a variable that remembers who's standing on it, and every enemy has a variable that remembers what hex it's standing on. When you damage a hex, the damage is coded as an incoming object that hits the hex. Simple enough. But Ardor is a game where the results of your attacks are previewed for you. Before the attack actually happens, the game shows you how it's going to play out. And this is absolutely crucial. The player needs to understand what's going to happen, and the preview has to be accurate. No exceptions. If my preview system tells the player an attack is enough to kill an enemy, and it doesn't, the player will feel like they were lied to, and they'd be right. So, we need to be able to predict how much damage an attack will do before we actually apply it. Should be easy. Just look at how much damage an attack does, subtract it from the enemy's current actual health, and you have your future enemy health you can show to the player. But as attacks start getting more complicated, so does the code. What about Poking Knife? Hit an adjacent hex 3 times for 4 damage. This attack doesn't have a flat amount of damage. It's split up into multiple hits. We can handle this. Just multiply the damage of each hit by how many there are, and you get the flat damage number. But notice what happened. The way we're figuring the preview damage is now different from how it actually happens. Poking Knife deals several hits, spread out over time, not one big multiplied lump sum. But the preview code treats it as if it did. This isn't a problem yet, but we're not yet done adding complications. What about Knockback, which pushes enemies away? Ardor is a game where you can combine card abilities, so the player can make a Poking Knife, which also knocks enemies back. That is a pretty suboptimal combination, because the first hit will push the enemy off the target hex, and the rest of the hits will whiff. Now our lump sum preview no longer works. It assumes all the damage will definitely hit, but that might not be true. The original sin of this approach is that it requires us to replicate how attacks will play out, trying to anticipate all the complexities and edge cases that will arise. Even if you succeed, you'll be limited when designing new content, because every new attack creates problems and escalates the complexity of the previous system. Here you can see the code in Ardor 1 that handles previewing knockback damage, and tries to juggle changing enemy positions and distribute damage appropriately. Appalling. There is a better way. Here you can see the knockback code in Ardor 2. As I wrote this function, I was practically weeping with relief at how quick and easy it was. Here's the approach. Instead of a single variable that remembers current state, enemies and hexes each have an array. Arrays are just lists of variables, where each slot in the list remembers some piece of information. Each of these arrays represent a timeline of events, where the first slot is the present, and future slots show what's going to happen. Think of it like frames of a video. A video is just a list of frames, in sequence, and to watch the video you step through all the frames. In my system, the first frame on each of my enemies and hexes represents where they are currently. And normally, all their arrays only have a single slot each, or only one frame. Because normally, nobody is moving, and nothing is happening, so we don't need to represent change. But when the player previews an attack, now things are going to change. So we need more frames. For a simple attack that just does one hit, we'd create a second slot in everybody's array. This second slot represents the future game state our attack will produce. The only thing that's going to change is one enemy's health, so most of our arrays will be 2 identical slots. For our target enemy's health, however, the second slot will have a lower health value, representing the attack's damage. Ardor 2 has a lot of UI and effects that show the player what an attack will do, and these are all pulling from the arrays I've been talking about. While the player is looking at different cards, without actually playing any of them, we'll generate many different arrays, each showing different possible futures. All of them will have the same first slot though, because that's what stores our current actual game state. When the player commits to playing a card, however, we lock in the current arrays and start stepping through them. Now, instead of preview effects, we use animations to show the action actually happen as the game plays through the parallel arrays like a video. The first slot represents the current moment, so to make the future real, we just delete the first slot in our arrays at each step, so that our future game state is now the present. Because our potential actions and our actual actions both draw from the same data, we skip the whole headache of trying to predict how an action will happen. The preview and the attack are now the same thing, so it's impossible for them to contradict each other. Also, we can avoid the problem some tactics games have, where actions take annoyingly long to play out, and you have to wait for the animations. If the player wants to play another card while the old one is still resolving, we've already calculated the result of this action, so we can skip right to the end and start previewing the next card. Many people have solved these problems before, and this approach is nothing new. Still though, it wasn't immediately obvious to me the first time around. If I'd known all the mechanics I'd add to Ardor 1 ahead of time, maybe I'd have done it this way from the start. Elsewhere, development is still going well. I've just about finished this deck of cards, with only one card art and maybe a few sound effects left to add. I've been experimenting a lot with various sounds, and in most cases settled on just using the same ones from Ardor 1. I've filled in a lot of necessary features for combat, like damage animations for the player and an arena background. I still need transitions into and out of combat arenas, a campaign save file, and most importantly, the card upgrade menu. That'll be my focus for next time, along with continuing to polish combat and add enemies. Anyways, that's all for today. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.